I'm here with Amanda Klein to talk about today's movie, Buried. How are you, Amanda?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. I'm excited about this movie. I have a lot of questions for you.
Okay, great.
So what is this movie about? How would you describe it?
Well, so it's about this man named Paul. He's an American contractor working in Iraq, and he's kidnapped, placed in a coffin under the ground. We're not quite sure how far down. We never actually get to see the location. And that is where he is for the entire film, the whole 90 minutes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Stuck in a box, yes.
So we're kind of forced. We have to experience his whole confinement with him, right?
Yes. And I think that's probably the real draw of the movie is that we're stuck in a box with Paul for 90 minutes. You know, other movies that have done something similar like this, like 127 hours where we're stuck with one actor, sometimes we'll get relief and we'll get a flashback or we'll get a fantasy sequence, but in this movie, we are stuck with Paul. You don't leave the box. Yeah, I think that's probably the most interesting aspect of the movie is that the director never quite leaves this one space.
That's crazy. So if the entire movie is just the one actor in a box, where does the dialogue come from?
Well, so that's a really interesting problem, I think, with a movie like this because, you know, if there's no one else to talk to, how do we find anything out about this actor? How do we get the plot going? Unless you have the actor kind of talking to himself, which would be weird.
Right.
So what the movie does is they give him a cell phone. And a lot of people, at least in reviews that I've read, have critiqued this. They said, well, that's, you know, how is he getting cell phone reception under the ground? But you just have to kind of ignore that and go with it. But he has a cell phone, which makes sense because he's been kidnapped and the kidnappers want to be able to communicate with him and give him their demands. So they're calling him periodically. And this is the way we get little bits of information about Paul. So when the phone first rings, you get a close-up of the screen and you see that the numbers are written in Arabic. So now we know, okay, he's in the Middle East. Because up until this point, we don't know anything about Paul. And then as he calls different people, we find out more about him. We find out he's married. We find out that he's this truck driver, which we didn't know initially. We find out the company that he works for. We find out that everyone in his convoy has been murdered except for him and I think one other person. So we do get little bits of information, and as the movie goes on, we can kind of put Paul together as a character. So it's a clever device. And so we have him, and then we have the voices on the phone, and that's all we have in terms of dialogue for the whole movie.
So the film also, like you were saying, you know, it uses the cell phone a lot. Does that have any meaning, do you think, or is it just a way to create dialogue?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think the main function of the cell phone is to have some kind of dialogue and to have, you know, movement in the plot. But I think the cell phone's also used in the movie to create a little bit of commentary about our culture right now and our reliance on cell phones and technology. First, just one thing that I found really interesting is that, you know, Paul can only call people whose numbers he's already memorized. You know, think about if you lost your cell phone, who could you actually call just from memory? I mean, there's only a few numbers you've probably memorized. So he calls his wife, who doesn't pick up her phone. He calls his home answering machine, which is very frustrating. You know, he's in this situation and he gets this answering machine message. I think he calls a sister-in-law who doesn't like him, a woman who's very angry with him, because we're also learning that he's a bit of a jerk. So, you know, that's one interesting thing. You know, if you lost your cell phone, what would happen? Who could you call? And then the other thing that I think we get from the movie and its use of cell phones is the fact that cell phones can give us a lot of freedom. It gives us the opportunity to connect with people, but at the same time, there's a lot of disconnect. And so Paul is calling all these people, and they're putting him on hold all the time. You know, he'll start to explain a situation. They'll be like, "Can you hold, please?" You know, and so he's stuck in this box, and he's freaking out, and he's on hold. And we have that music that people play when you're on hold. And so there's a lot of commentary about how there's also this disconnect with cell phones, and it makes it easy for people to ignore you, to put you on hold, to put you off. People are always hanging up on him, and he's getting increasingly frustrated. So, so I think there's a little bit of commentary there in the film.
That makes sense.
The cell phone.
That's cool. An underlying meaning. So this must have been difficult for Ryan Reynolds. He's, you know, pressure's on him. There's no one else. What did you think of his role? How did he do?
Well, I mean, I think when an actor sees a script like this, it's like a nice juicy steak, right? They're like, yes, finally all these years of acting school, and I can have 90 minutes where the camera's just looking at me. So I think for any actor, this is very exciting to get a role like this. Whether or not Ryan Reynolds was the best choice, I'm not sure. We were talking before we started filming about how you said some people were saying that he's known mostly for his comedies, so it might have been.
This is different. The people that are his fans want to see him
making jokes, and and there are actually a few light moments in the film where I think somebody says, well, what's going to happen if we don't pay the ransom? And he says, oh, they're going to take me to SeaWorld. What do you think's going to happen? That was probably the the one joke in the movie. But no, I don't think he was quite up to the task. I think it'd be hard for any actor to carry a movie for 90 minutes. And as we were talking about before, I think he's being sort of compared with James Franco in this movie, who also did a movie that was released last year about a young man confined and trying to get out of a desperate situation. And that, in 127 hours, James Franco his arm is stuck under a boulder. And most of the movie is just him, going through, the various stages of, panic, terror, and then trying to survive, and then despair. And Ryan Reynolds does that too, but I'm not quite as convinced with his acting in the film. So.
It also seems challenging for the cinematographer.
Yes.
The whole time they just have one space. How do you make 90 minutes look visually interesting?
Well, so that's another, I think, so you have the scriptwriter's challenge, and then you have the cinematographer's challenge. So you have one set, and it's a boring set. It's just a wooden box, and you have one actor who takes up most of your set. You don't really have any props. There's, I think, a lighter, a cell phone, and then he starts to get some light sticks. I don't know. A lot of things appear in the box that, I don't know, that stretches the bounds of what you, of realism. But basically, the cinematographer is very limited. And so I thought it was actually visually very interesting for a movie like this. Sometimes we get a lot of close-ups. Sometimes he's filmed from his feet, and so we get these long shots of his whole body. There's one shot where the cinematographer manages to go all the way around him. So I don't know how they filmed that. I'm sure they had different, sets so that, he could get around Ryan Reynolds. But, creative, I think it was pretty creative. And they mess with the lighting. Like sometimes it's blackness. Sometimes it's the glow of the cell phone. Sometimes it's the lighter. So I thought they really played with the possibilities and made it visually interesting, because we never leave the box. So, I think it was sort of it's almost like an experiment with everything that they had to do, and not totally successful, but still very interesting overall.
Definitely. So the last question I have for you is, you mentioned, and as we saw in the trailer, we saw kind of a glimpse of it, that it's about an American who is kidnapped in Iraq. Is this saying anything about the relationship with Americans and Iraq and everything like that?
Yeah, there's definitely some commentary in the movie. For me, this was the least successful aspect of the film. I think just the fact that you have an average guy who's doing a job. We find out as the movie goes on that he has $700 in his savings account. That's all the money he has. He has a wife, he has a young son. His wife didn't want him to go to Iraq, but he was told that it was safe. Okay, I think that's all the commentary that we need. We know that the relations between Americans and the Iraqis are strained. We know that America really blundered over there, that we have a lot of work to do in terms of, what's what I'm looking for? Peacekeeping. He's attacked by insurgents. I think that's enough, but then the film kind of takes it further by having Paul talk with the terrorists on the phone a lot, and they talk about what is a terrorist, and there's a lot of Paul screaming, "I'm an American," and it's a little over the top, and I don't think we quite needed all that, because it's in itself, it's a horrible situation, and I think it's a situation that probably happened quite a bit with everyday people getting kidnapped and becoming pawns in this larger international problem. So. They probably didn't need to quite go as far. And his company's really evil in the film. The company he works for, they tell him that he's fired so that they don't have to pay insurance money to his family. And all of that seemed a bit, and they're doing this over the phone. And so, but other than that, I mean, visually and in terms of the acting, there's definitely some interesting things going on with the movie.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I hope everyone enjoys Buried.
you.